Okay, great.
So welcome everyone. As Root already told you, my name is Jasneet. I represent a brand called Scrum Advisors, and this brand is under the company called EduCoach Consultants, and we focus on providing Scrum coaching and Scrum training. So about me, I am an electronics engineer, a Scrum practitioner. I am Exin accredited trainer. I am ASM certified from Exin. I am CSM, ACSM, and CSPSM from Scrum Alliance. And I am PSM 1 certified from scrum.org. And as Root again mentioned, over the last 6 years of my teaching experience, I have coached over 200 students. So today what we are looking at is discussing about Scrum. So it's an introduction session about Scrum and what Scrum actually means in terms of it being an incremental and iterative approach to product development. So the objective of this workshop is to learn the differences between a defined and an empirical process. Now, when we talk of defined, what we're talking of is the traditional waterfall approach. And when we say empirical, we are talking of the Agile or the Scrum approach. We'll also look at which approach is better and how to choose one over the other. Now, this workshop will also help you understand the values and the principles behind Agile and Scrum and how they help an organization reduce time to market. We'll also go a little bit in detail, or not very too much in detail, just have an overview of the Scrum framework and how it can be used. And we'll also look at how to use Agile as a personal productivity tool and learn how Elon Musk uses the time blocking method to manage time effectively. Now, this time blocking method that we're talking of, it's one of the key elements in Scrum. So we'll discuss about that. I hope everyone knows who Elon Musk is. I'm assuming that. Okay, so let's dive in. I'll just go quickly over what is Agile. Now, Agile is not a framework, standard, or a methodology. It is not same as Scrum. It is not limited to software development projects only, and it is not governed by one certification, qualification, or an institute. So what is Agile? Agile is a set of guiding principles and values. They are applicable beyond software development. So if somebody is saying that, and it's a very common misconception that we have these days, that Agile is specific to software development. It started as that, but now it is not limited to software development. It is being used widely in IT. It's being used in marketing. We have a specific course workshop for Agile marketing, and it's being used in other product developments also. I am an electronics engineer. I have a product development company, and I use Scrum within my organization. So Scrum is part of Agile. Now, Agile is brought to life via framework standards and methodologies and processes such as Scrum. Also, Agile is more perspective than a prescription. Now, if you want some more information, Agile's core values and principles are defined in the Agile Manifesto, which is available at agilemanifesto.org. And they list down all the Agile values and principles. So I'll like to do a 2-minute exercise just to get everybody more involved in this workshop. What I would like you to do is, can you create a summary of what defines a successful project. I'll give you 2 minutes to basically come up with the steps required to develop a successful project, from requirement to the end delivery and maintenance. So what do you think are the steps which are involved in successful development of a project? And you can put your comments in the chat window, please. I would like everybody's comments because that would be very helpful. So steps required for a successful development of a project, from requirement analysis to ending of the project. What are the different steps? Yeah, specific goal with deadline is good. Yes, Brian, identify problems, define requirements, solve problems, and release. And at the end, yes, celebrate success. Mm-hmm. Yes, John, that's correct. Have clear defined project that satisfies user requirements and delivered to satisfaction. And as Amy said, identify active participations from end users, define clear business need, communicate, all very good. Caroline, you're right. Scope, budget, time frame. And of course, an objective and benefits. Yes, Ian. So I can see that you know a little bit about Scrum. Definition of done met. So develop, yeah, Joel, you're correct. Prioritize requirement, relative value, plan, deliver for early value, build, deliver, confirm value delivered. Satisfaction to the stakeholder, done. Yeah, that's a very good point that you made, Caroline. Done. I actually use that term done a lot in my organization. Or other way of saying it is I use the term completely done instead of just done. Yeah. So I'll just summarize what I just saw, what you guys just mentioned. So if we do summarize, basically any project development that we talk of works in the following manner. We have our requirements, we do a design, we start the implementation, and then we do the verification and testing. And once we release, we enter the maintenance stage. These are basic 5 steps. And of course, there would be some other steps which can be added in between, but this is how we go in traditional project development. We start from requirements, we move to design, then the implementation, the verification, and the maintenance. So each step is followed, completed, and then we move on to the next step. Now, also, when we talk of the traditional development, we are also talking in terms of saying once we have a requirement, we get our funding, then we have a time defined, the time to deliver. And once we do deliver, well, management is happy. But what defines the success of a project? Now, the traditional success of any project is defined by, if you are if you're able to develop a project as per the initial specification or the scope, if you are able to deliver on time, and if you are able to deliver within the budget. This is the traditional success definition. Now, when we are talking about the initial specification or the scopes, we are basically saying that we are able to define all the ideas or the specifications of the new project at the start of the project. We predict that these things or these requirements are valuable when we are starting a project. However, what has been found is that these predictions are generally lousy. Now, why? There was a report done by the Chaos report by a Standish group, and this is called the Chaos report, and it's a very famous report, which says that normally the early predictions that we do of the requirements are 35% of those requirements change over the period of the project development, and 60% of the features that we started with are rarely or never used. So if we took 20 major items, only a few of the items are actually useful, which are valuable. So what we are looking at is a specification that we started with at the start of a project. And by the time we reach the end of the project, we are saying 35% of the requirements would have changed during our project requirement or by the end of the time we deliver the project, because we are not allowed to change during the scope of the project during the project. And when we reach the end, the requirements, the features that were required are of no use now. And 60% of the features which were there are rarely used. So all we are left is 5%. And this is an actual report which was done for some US clients by a Standish group. So that basically leaves us that sticking to the scope of a project as required by a waterfall approach may not be the right method. Let's look at another aspect. Now, let's talk about a problem that we would like to solve. Now, the problem that we need to solve is we need to keep the room temperature at 21 degrees centigrade. There is no thermometer in the room. So in that case, how would we like to do that? At 8, so let's say the time in the room, if the office starts at 8 a.m. So it's 8:50 mentioned wrongly here. If it's 8 a.m., so 8 a.m. your heater element turns on and the temperature starts to increase. Okay, and then at 8:30 a.m. you basically cut off the heater and you do the cooling on, because now because the heating went above the requirement and you need the heating to be on. So this is called a cyclic control, because we don't have a thermometer in the room. Because we don't have a thermometer in the room, there's no way of knowing what the temperature is going to be. So you do a cyclic control. You turn on the heater and then you turn on the cooling. Then you turn on a heater, then you switch off the cooling and turn the heating back on. So this kind of a cyclic cooling is what we would like to do so that we can keep a temperature at 21 degrees centigrade. But do you think that this will work? I don't think so, because let's say the initial temperature is at 18 degrees centigrade, and if the heater element turns on, it'll, as the heater temperature starts increasing, at 8:30 a.m. when the cooling turns on, the temperature might be at 25 degrees centigrade, or maybe even higher, 28 to 27 degrees centigrade. And now let's say the cooling turns on and the temperature starts to drop and it goes to 16, 17, 18. We have no way of controlling. We have no way of knowing. So basically this system does not work. Okay, if this does not work, what can we do? Why don't we, now what could be the issues that the system is not working when we basically kept, what are the variables that we need to consider to ensure that the temperature can be maintained? So this is an exercise for everyone. Let's list all the variables we need to consider so that we can have the temperature of the room maintained at 21 degrees centigrade. One of the things that I would consider is how many people would there be in the room, because as the number of people increases, the temperature would become higher. So we would need to ensure the cooling is higher. So that's one aspect that I would like to control. And other could probably be size of the room, because bigger the room, that would require more cooling, and it may also require more heating. So those are two things that I can think of, and I would like to see what you would like to think of as variables that we can use to control the temperature of the room. Can you just put it into the chat window, please? Yeah, windows, current temperature, size of the room, number of windows, very important. Physical activity, yeah, if it's a gym, your activity makes a big difference. Height of the ceiling, absolutely. Are there ovens in the room? Yes, absolutely, we could think about that. Insulation type, number of servers, because the more the servers, if it's a server room, the cooling requirements are higher. Type of heating, absolutely. The temperature outside, is it sunny? That makes a big difference. Yes. So I got your point and I understand, yeah. But tell me one thing, do you think we can consider all the variables? Will it work? Even if we are able to list down whatever things you talked about, do you think that can still work? Would you be able to, yes, would you ever be able to consider all the variables? No, I don't think so. So if we are not able to consider all the elements, we are left with only one solution, that we need to have some kind of a transparency built into the system which can provide a feedback. So we come to a solution that we need an empirical process control. We need a thermometer in the room which can provide us the transparency. So we don't try to predict all the variables, we work with a feedback. So immediately we close the loop. Now what we did was we added a transparency which provides an adapt cycle to our control system here. And this control system then inspects this, the sensor or the temperature. And once it gets the feedback, it adapts to the heating or the cooling requirements. And this is what we call as the empirical process control. So business model that accommodates change. So empirical process is an incremental and an iterative model. Why iterative? Because it works in steps. It basically works on a feedback. And why incremental? It basically keeps modifying in increments. We'll be talking a little more about incremental and iterative, but what we have to look at is that this is what the empirical process control is all about, where we have a feedback loop built into the system. We are getting feedback about how we are performing, and then that inspection is performed every cycle. And once we inspect, we adapt, ensuring that we are able to perform better. That is where the empirical process control comes into picture. So if we talk about Scrum Guide, now Scrum Guide or the Scrum theory, as mentioned in the Scrum Guide, says that Scrum is founded on the empirical process control theory or empiricism. And empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is known. So as we keep making decisions on our knowledge today and we keep moving forward with the feedback, we are able to perform better. Instead of worrying about what we can achieve tomorrow, we work on what is available today as per our knowledge today. And Scrum employs iterative and incremental approach to optimize predictability and control risk. How does it do that? When we are talking of iterative, we are talking that we would be working in cycles. We are saying that when we are working in cycles, we will be getting feedbacks at the end of each cycle. So when we are getting feedback at each cycle at the end, so we are breaking up our work into small iterations. So let's say there is a project which is scheduled for 1 year. We break it up into 1 month cycles. So we have a target that we need to achieve for that 1 month. And at the end of that 1 month, we are basically showing our output to the customer, to the other stakeholders, getting a feedback. So we have a control loop built into our process development now. And when we get a feedback, we basically are able to improve in our next cycle. And each cycle, we provide an increment on the product and we keep moving forward. It's like a spiral. We keep doing a cyclic work, but we still keep moving forward. And because we know the number of cycles that are required to be able to deliver the required scope or the requirement of the project, so we are predictable and we are controlling risk by being able to deliver an increment at the end of each cycle to the customer and get his or her feedback. So we control risk and we provide predictability. Also, if there is a change required, we don't need to do the change at the end of the project. Now, what would happen in waterfall approach? Waterfall approach, we basically take the project, we design, we start implementing, and then when we are implementing, we basically have different teams doing the implementation work, and then we basically integrate towards the end, and then we test the project before we do a delivery. Now, if there are any changes required by the customer, we would not be able to incorporate any change there. But in Scrum, because we are doing an iterative and an incremental approach, so we are breaking it up within 1 month cycle or even lower. So in Scrum, we do a 2 week or a 4 week cycle, between 2 week to 4 week cycle. If there is a change required, all we may need to do is scrap 2 weeks or 3 weeks of work if the change is required. So we are able to control the risk. We are not required to change at the end of the cycle or end of the product delivery. So we are able to optimize predictability and control risk by following the empirical process control theory. Now, these 3 pillars uphold every implementation of the empirical process control. That's transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Remember, we were talking about that. So we have a system which inspects, and once the inspection is done, the inspection can only be done if the system is transparent. And once the system inspects, it does a correction if required by adapting. So this adapt, inspect, and transparency are the pillars of empirical process control theory. In Scrum, there are so many feedback cycles built in that the chances of going wrong are very low. So that is how we control risk in Agile or Scrum. Basically, if you look at it, in Scrum, you have pairing, which is called software pairing, which is one of the features of Agile, not only Scrum, it is actually an Agile feature. It is more used in XP, which is extreme programming, which is another of Agile frameworks, but some of the teams, a lot of teams actually use the program pairing in Scrum also. Then we have test-driven development, which is done every minute. Then we have continuous integration, which is happening every hour. We have daily scrums, which is done every day. And then we have sprint reviews, which are at the end of a sprint cycle or at the end of the iteration. When we talk of sprint, we are talking of the iteration. That's the iterative cycle that we were talking of earlier. So with so many feedback cycles built into Scrum, we feel that the risk is far better controlled in empirical process than in the defined or the waterfall approach. Now, when we compare the empirical or the defined process, we can say that defined process is like the baking. Now, in baking, what happens? Basically, when you start, you have your recipe, you mix all your ingredients, and you put them into the oven and let the oven run for defined period of time. Once the baking is done, you take it out and you test it or you taste it. Now, is it possible during that cycle to taste the product? No, you cannot. If you have a cake, you can only taste it at the end of the cycle. And at the end of the cycle, if you missed out an ingredient, well, the whole thing is scrapped. So that's the define or that is equivalent to a define or the waterfall approach. While in empirical or the agile approach, we can basically correlate it to cooking. In cooking, you have the initial ingredient list, you mix them, you put it in the pan or whatever you're using for cooking, and middle of the cooking, you're tasting it. You're getting the feedback. When you taste, you need salt, you add salt. If you need to add any other ingredient, you need to add chili or anything, you do that. And you constantly are able to modify and adapt to ensure that you get the product that you want. And so what happens now is you're controlling the risk because you're able to get the feedback, you're able to taste it. So that is where the controlling the risk becomes a very important part of our empirical or the agile process.
So Amy asked if you could talk about pairing some more and how that supports the empirical process.
Okay, so program pairing is more about pairing is actually about when you have two programmers sitting on the same terminal working on the same coding together. So what happens is, and they switch maybe after 30 minutes or after 1 hour. So one person programs, other person is reviewing, and then they switch. So the second person now programs and the first person is reviewing. That's called program pairing. So it's an approach which is very popular in extreme programming, which is one of the another of agile frameworks, which is very popular. And it's more that extreme programming is more about the specifics of programming. It's more towards the programming cycle. So some of the Scrum teams also use program pairing, though there are companies which dislike it just for the sake because there are two people doing the same work together. But it has been shown and it has been proven that the program pairing can, in the long run, is more beneficial than detrimental. Oh yes, even virtually they are doing it. I mean, I know the things have changed, but yes, Brian, Even virtually, the people are still do the program pairing, but it is a new way of a new approach. But yes, something which has to be, yeah, screen sharing is one option. So I hope that clarifies your ideas about what an empirical process or the agile process or a defined or the waterfall process looks like. So that's the basis of the agile and scrum compared to the waterfall or the traditional approach. Now, it is not to say that one method is better or the other method is better. Both have their benefits. So if both have their benefits, how do we choose? What and where can we use those methods? Should we plan things before starting, or use the empirical approach, which is adapt to what we know? So in empirical approach or in Scrum, what we say is, let us start with the basic guidelines, with the basic, and let the architecture emerge during the development cycle itself. While in traditional approach, what we say is that let's define the complete requirements, let's define the architecture completely before we start working. So these are two different approaches, and the best approach depends on the problem. So how do we choose? Let's think about the products that you want to develop and rate your complexity of the requirement from 1 to 10. With 1 being very well-known details, everyone agrees, no misunderstanding, no unclarity, and things probably will not change during the life cycle of the project development. While on the higher side is where the things are unknown, people have different interpretation of what the product has to look like, and the chances of the changes happening during the life cycle of the product development is very high. So this is one scale, which is this requirement or the scope scale. Second is the technology or the use or the understanding of the development team that is going to work on the product development. So one again being when the development team knows everything about the technology to be used. Nothing is new. It is very stable. There are no surprises. There will be no changes. And on the higher side, we are looking at when the development team is faced with a newer technology, a lot of things are unknown because it's new technology, and the team would learn about technology as they go along in the development life cycle of the product. So if we now plot the requirement on the y-axis and the technology on the x-axis, going from known to unknown and going from unknown to unknown here also, we basically have something called a Stacy matrix. So at the lower end, where things are known on technology front and the requirement front or the scope front, we have things which are very simple. And that is where your agile or the defined process can work. Because we know the technology, we know the scope, we know both of them are not going to change during the development life cycle of the product. So, okay, let's design, let's finalize the requirements, let's finalize our architecture, let's start working on the project, let's implement, test, and deliver. That's the simple way of doing things. And that is where our waterfall approach would work beautifully. However, if we go above on the y-axis or go on the right to the x-axis, where the things become complicated, where the scope might be changing or expected to change, other technology is new, technology might change. So in this is where you would probably need to adapt as the project as the product development life cycle goes on, and when you need to adapt, you basically look towards the empirical or the agile processes. Same is the case when you have complex, when both the things, the requirement and the technology, are unknown. Here, again, basically, you would be going for the agile product development or the empirical approach. If you go higher up, that's where the chaos is. And basically, you should not even think about entering this zone. You need to move towards the complicated or the complex zone to be able to implement your agile process and get a successful product delivery. Now, other than that, you would also need to think about the complexity of the people issues. Human issues are never issues. Now, at the lower end, we have where the human issues would not add to the complexity. It is so easy to work together. The team is able to form to properly. I mean, there is no issues being cropping up within the communication is excellent. There is no politics and everybody behaves transparently and predictably. On the other end, where the people involved add significant complexity to the whole issue. They have hidden agendas, they have different opinions, the communication is not working. So that those issues also would be cropping in. So you need to understand those also to be able to say whether you want to use the defined process where at the lower end or the empirical process at the higher end. So we can take a 2-minute break and we can come back and we can talk more, because I'll talk a little more about Scrum after this. Is that okay, or and you would like me to continue? Or if people have questions, I can take them now.
Yes, please. I'm fine with the break.
John, can you speak a little louder?
Oh, I said yes, please. I'm fine with the break.
Okay, let's do a 5-minute break and then we can start back. I hope everyone is back.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on. So this is how, so basically what we were discussing up till now was what the empirical process control is, how it is different from the defined or the traditional waterfall approach, and the empirical process control is what defines Scrum. Now, what is Scrum? So Scrum is a framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. The important thing to remember here is the term highest possible value. How do we deliver an item of highest possible value? We do so because we have a list which has been prioritized. Now that's the role of the product owner. We'll be discussing these roles as we go forward. So the product owner basically prioritizes the list of work that need to be performed. Let's say there are 10 items that need to be delivered, 10 features that need to be delivered in our product backlog. Now, the product owner's role is to prioritize those lists based on the priority, which can be based on their market value, business values. There are different criteria that he or she would probably use to define the priority of those items. Now, let's say we have 6 iterations to finish those 10 items. By end of the 6th iteration, we are able to do 8 items out of those 10 items. But those 8 items are the highest possible value, because the last 2 items are the least priority items. So even if they do get not added to the product, we still are able to deliver the highest possible value. And at the end of that 6th iteration or the 6th sprint, the product owner or the customer may decide, okay, we have the highest possible value that we wanted, we will release the product to the market. So that is how we are able to deliver the highest possible value. Now, Scrum is not a process technique or a definitive method. It is a framework within which you can employ various processes and techniques. Just as I talked about the pair programming, that's not part of Scrum, but we can employ that technique within this framework to be able to deliver our product. Time blocking, now that's again not a defined part, but it's still a part. So it's a technique that we would be using, and we'll be discussing about that. So there are different techniques. Test-driven development, that's another methodology which is very frequently used by the Scrum teams. Now that's not defined within the Scrum framework, but it's a technique which can be used within the Scrum framework to be able to deliver your product. It is very frequently said that Scrum has been left incomplete, deliberately left incomplete, so that you can adapt it to your work. You can adapt it to the processes that you have. And that's another aspect of Scrum. It's adaptable. And that's what we're talking about. Now, the Scrum framework consists of the Scrum teams and their associated roles, events, artifacts, and rules. And we'll be looking at them as we go forward. So basically, when we talk of rules, there are 3 major roles. One is the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the team. There are 5 major meetings, though Scrum defines only 3 meetings, but we'll be discussing that. So we have daily Scrum, we have sprint planning, which is also Scrum defines 4 meetings, but we're talking about 5 meetings. I'll tell you why. We have daily Scrum, which is defined by the Scrum guide, the sprint planning, which can be broken into 2 parts, the what and the how. Then we have the sprint review, the sprint retrospective, and we have something called backlog grooming. Now, backlog grooming is not defined in the Scrum guide, but it is one of the important aspects of your Scrum process or the Scrum framework. Then we have 5 artifacts or the documents that are required. You have the product backlog, you have the sprint backlog, and you have definition of done. Now, these 3 are defined in the Scrum guide. Other than that, you have the sprint burn down and the release burn up. Now, these are used to monitor. So these are not artifacts per se, which are defined in the Scrum guide, but they are used frequently again to be able to monitor our progress during the Scrum development. So let's look at a complete overview of the Scrum framework. Each Scrum project is done in number of sprints. And as we talked of, Scrum framework is used to address complex adaptive problems while delivering products at the highest possible values. Now, Scrum pillars, we discussed this earlier, is based on transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And there are 5 Scrum values which are defined in the Scrum guide. Now, I've been talking about Scrum guide. Scrum guide is available at scrumguides.org. If anybody wants to download, they can download it. It's available free of cost. It's a 18-page booklet, out of which 15 pages are what are required to be read, and they completely define the Scrum. And it was created by co-creators, which is Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, and they basically released this Scrum guide about 14 years ago. I don't remember the exact year, but yeah, I mean, it's what Scrum is all about. So if you are very interested, you should be able to download it. Okay, or if you want, I can send you the link. You can download it from there. So Scrum values which are defined in the Scrum guide are the commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect. And we'll look at them further as we go along. Now, as I mentioned earlier, each Scrum project is done in number of iterations or sprints. Now, it is defined that these sprints should be between 2 weeks to 4 week iterations. So during the sprint cycle, we are able to analyze, design, build, test, and deliver. So each of this happens within a single sprint, and we repeat this process each sprint. So like we talked about in traditional project development, we are talking of, on the waterfall approach, we say, first we will analyze. Once we've done the analysis completely, we will design. Once we've done the design completely, we'll build. And once we've built completely, we'll test, and then we will deliver. But in Scrum, what is required is that you do all of these together within a single sprint. So there is nothing called a complete analysis of the product or the complete design of the product. You're basically doing it every sprint for each chunk of work that you have identified for that sprint or an iteration. And at the end of that iteration, you are delivering a potentially releasable product increment. Now, each sprint is between 2 to 4 weeks long, but cannot exceed the 4-week duration. The scope of the project is defined in the product backlog. It is also the remaining scope of the product, because as the items keep reducing in the product backlog, so the items keep reducing in the product backlog as we pick these items and place them in the sprint backlog for execution. Now, sprint backlog is also the plan for our sprint. So basically, the development team uses the sprint backlog for each sprint, and sprint backlog is filled from the product backlog every time during the sprint planning exercise. Now, product backlog is owned by the product owner, and he or she is responsible for maximizing the value of the product backlog. And he or she does that by ordering the items. When we say order based on priority to achieve the goals of the product development. So basically, the product owner prioritizes the items in the product backlog, and the product backlog is owned by the product owner. Sprint backlog is owned by the development team. The sprint is executed multiple times as required until the project is finished, which could mean all product backlog items are done, or the customer thinks that enough value has been created. As I told you, let's say a product is being developed at the end of sixth sprint. The product owner or the customer says, okay, we finished 8 high value or the high priority items, and I think we can stop the development here. So that's what we mean, or the customer, when the customer thinks that enough value has been created. Now, within the sprint, there are multiple time-boxed events which happen. First of that is called sprint, is a daily scrum, which is a 15-minute exercise which happens every day. Also, we have the sprint planning meeting, which happens at the start of the sprint. This is where the items from the product backlog are picked up and added to the sprint backlog. So this is where the sprint backlog is updated during the sprint planning meeting. Other than that, we also have a sprint review, which is the demonstration of the increment or every cycle at the end of every sprint, and also communicating the progress and receiving feedback for the stakeholders and the customers. This is where that happens. Now, sprint retrospective, which is the last meeting of the sprint, is for the self-improvement of the team. It is time for introspection for the team and plan for improvement in the next sprint. And finally, we have the done increment, which is delivered at the end of each sprint. Now, this is also called potentially releasable product increment. Why do we call it potentially releasable? Because at the end of each sprint, the product owner may decide to release it or may not, but it is potentially, it has been tested thoroughly and it is completely ready to be released. Whether the product owner decides to release it or not is totally up to him or her, but it is potentially releasable. So we've discussed two Scrum roles, one is product owner and the development team. So the product owner basically is the one who is talking to the stakeholders, the customers, and the executive. It is not to say that these customers and the stakeholders do not talk to the development team, but any feature or any item which needs to be added to the product development has to be gone through, is the responsibility of the product owner, and product owner has to add it to the product backlog, because the development team will work only from the items which are there in the product backlog. So during the communication, when we are receiving the feedback from the stakeholders and during the sprint review, these stakeholders and the customers are the ones who provide the feedback to the development team. And finally, when we've done the multiple sprints, we get our product. So we've talked about the product owner, we've talked about the development team. Now we look at the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master promotes and supports the Scrum framework, and he or she is the servant leader for the Scrum team. Now, this slide defines gives you the complete overview of your Scrum framework as defined by the Scrum Guide. Now, we were talking about the Scrum values. So the different Scrum values are courage. So Scrum team members have the courage to do the right thing and work on the tough problems. They have the focus on, they focus on the work of the sprint and the goals of the Scrum team. The Scrum team members personally commit to achieving the goals of the Scrum team. Respect. So Scrum team members respect each others to be capable and independent people. Openness. Scrum team and its stakeholders agree to be open about all the work and the challenges that come with performing that work. So few of the principles that we've discussed about Scrum, we've discussed about prioritization, we've discussed about empiricism, we've discussed about emergence. When we say the product architecture or the product backlog emerges during the product development, because as we keep improving, we keep understanding more about the product, we keep adding, the customer keeps adding his or her requirements in the product, and it emerges. The architecture also emerges during the product development lifecycle. Self-organization is where the team is self-organized to be able to deliver the product. Nobody tells the development team how to do the work. So the work normally is divided during the sprint between the what and the how. So what is when it is when the complete Scrum team comes together to work on what needs to be done during the sprint cycle, which is the work which has been prioritized in the product backlog by the product owner. And how is the part is when the team gets together and works out the nitty-gritties and works out how they will deliver the product. And that's the responsibility of the development team. And that is why they are supposed to be self-organized. Collaboration, they are working in a collaboration. Time box, we will be discussing a little bit about time box as we go on. And we also went through the adapt and the inspect cycle. So let's look at the aspect of time box. Now, almost all the items that we've talked of within the Scrum, the meetings, different meetings, are time boxed in Scrum. The daily Scrum is supposed to be time boxed to 15 minutes every day. You are not supposed to exceed that 15-minute time box. The sprint planning meeting is supposed to be 8 hours for a 4-week Scrum sprint cycle. If the sprint cycle is less than 4 weeks, it is supposed to be lesser. The sprint review is also time boxed. So all the meetings within the Scrum are time boxed. Now, time box, it is a predefined maximum duration. We never extend the duration of a time box just because we need to finish something. We adapt ourselves to finish everything inside the time box. And if it is not possible, we drop activities that have the least importance. Remember, I was talking about the maximum value being delivered. So out of the 10 items, if we decide that the scope of the project is 6 iterations or the six sprint cycles, and we are able to finish 8 topmost items, we drop the last 2 items because we are time boxed to the 6 items. And the last 2 items that we drop are the least important items. So that's an example. So even sprints are time boxed. Either you have 2-week cycles, 3-week cycles, 4-week cycle, between 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and it does not exceed a 4-week cycle. And again, during the sprint, if you decided to finish 3 tasks and you're able to finish only 2.5 tasks, you basically are saying that you finished 2 tasks and you drop the 3rd task and you take up into the next sprint. Time boxes have a predefined and usually frozen set of items to be completed. We define the items upfront and do not change them. We can refine the items, example user stories, but we do not completely change them. We do not add new items or remove items. Because everything is changing in agile environment all the time, we need to focus to stay productive. So while everything is changing, we keep short durations frozen and focus on development. So we ensure that we are working in sprints, in short durations, and we keep them frozen. It creates regularity, discipline, and in particular, it helps us create potentially releasable solutions at the end of each sprint. It helps increase focus, especially when everything is changing and new things are coming up all the time. Now, how to manage time effectively, even if your schedule is hectic. So one of the methods is the Elon Musk time blocking method. Now, this billionaire founder of CEO of Tesla and SpaceX usually spends about 100 hours a week on both the companies. Also, he's plotting to have humans on Mars and doing other regular activities like eating lunch and other stuff. Musk is also a family man. He spends about 4 days each week with his 5 children. He also manages to find time for regular exercises 2 days a week. And he has some of his personal hobbies also. Now, how does he manage this time? And that's what we look at. So from the time Elon Musk lifts his head off his pillow, which is at 7 a.m., his day is already been pre-planned in advance. And there is no room for random interruptions. What he does is he intentionally plans his day out in 5-minute increments of time blocks. And each time block is assigned with a specific task or activity. Now, this time block can be just a 5-minute block or can be multiple of 5-minute blocks. So he could be using 10 5-minute blocks, which is a 50-minute block for, let's say, replying to emails. But those 50 minutes are already pre-planned and defined. And once that 50 minutes is over, and even if the emails have all not been sent out, he would probably stop that work there and move on to the next task. Now, there is criticism to this approach because even though the method is simple, it is open to criticism because scheduling your every time slot in your day would become too robotic and tedious, but this misses and would probably miss the purpose of time blocking. However, the advantages are multiple. Time blocking forces you to fill up free time with pre-commitments and plan of action. In doing so, you would also avoid the effects of Parkinson's law. Now, Parkinson's law states that work tends to expand to fill the time allotted for it. So if an item requires to be finished probably in 2 hours, and if you allot 5 hours to it, you would still finish it in 5 hours. But then you would be doing unnecessary or lower priority items on that, which could probably be avoided. And if you allotted 2 hours, you would still provide the maximum value within that 2 hours and be able to deliver that work. Another benefit of time blocking is that it reduces the number of choices you have to make in any given moment, which boosts your willpower for peak productivity. And this is very important because decision-making is what creates stress. Decision-making is one of the most difficult exercises. Decision-making is what causes you to procrastinate. So if you take away those choices, the number of choices you have to make, all of a sudden your productivity increases. You stop procrastinating. You're boosting your productivity by increasing your willpower. So how can you use this time blocking method? So one of the ways is that you basically break up your sheet into 3 columns with time here, with the activities here, and some comments on those activities here. Now, basically, if you look at it, this 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., which would probably be 12, if we take 5-minute time blocks, I normally do it in 10-minute time blocks. That's why I was saying 6. I would take this 6 time blocks for emails and follow-ups. So this is allotted. Now, the other activity, which is from 9 to 10, which is again my 6 time blocks of 10 minutes each, I would probably assign to a task 1. Then another 10 minutes for task 2. So this time block is task 2. This time block, which is again 10-minute time block, is to task 3. So I would probably break it up in this manner. So this is what is mentioned here. Divide a piece of ruled paper into 2 columns. On the left column, allocate each 2 lines to each hour or 5-minute or 10-minute block of the day, whichever you prefer. I prefer 10-minute blocks. Estimate the amount of time each each task is going to have to complete. Then write these tasks on the left column with their respective time blocks. Optional, add commentary notes in the corresponding right column. You may add buffer time or extra room around each block to allow for adjustment or unexpected activities. Ideally, to achieve effective time blocking, you should spend up to 10 minutes of the previous evening completing your time block for the next day. Do not underestimate the time required to complete a task. Bigger tasks, which are more difficult, will be used in the time blocking method. So you should break those tasks up into smaller tasks. Make sure to revise your plan in case of unplanned interruptions, and also keep some buffers to allow for creepages. So does anyone have any questions on this time blocking method? Okay.
Well, what are your biggest challenges trying to adhere to this personally?
So see, I am able to do it, but at times I miss it. I think the biggest challenge is to be able to stick to that plan, to be able to plan it, to be able to. So that's a willpower that you need to have, that every evening sit down and make it. The first thing that you need to do is just list down all the activities that you think you need to complete for the next day. First time you do it, it will take you about an hour. I can promise you that, or it may even take more than that. But now I think after a couple of months, I was able to bring that time down to 15 to 20 minutes every evening. But the challenge is to do it. And I can assure you, it helps tremendously. The productivity increases amazingly. And the other challenge that you will face is after 2 or 3 weeks of doing it continuously, even if you're able to do it, you would start feeling, no, I think I can. You would probably start getting bored with it. And then you would lose that momentum. And then you need to get back. And probably for a week or two, you would not do that. But again, make sure you get back to it. So keep repeating it, keep getting back to it, and then it becomes a habit. Making anything a habit is when you actually are able to get the maximum benefit out of it. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thanks.
So now I'll move on to the next item that I wanted to talk about Scrum, which is about how does Agile Scrum help an organization. So basically what has been seen is that whenever a organization is using Agile or Scrum, they tend to have higher productivity within a team. Now that higher productivity also leads to higher quality. Now higher quality is the hallmark of a Scrum product development team, because we are delivering a product increment every sprint, which has been, and it is potentially releasable product development or product increment, which has been tested. So we are testing at every sprint. So quality is automatically built in to the product delivery process. Now, because the employees are able to deliver are able to have higher productivity levels, and they are able to deliver high quality items each sprint, the job satisfaction is automatically higher, which again leads to engaged employees. And that leads to a cycle of productivity gains. And this is a ever repeating cycle. And that is where our incremental and iterative life cycle comes into picture, because this cycle of continuous improvement keeps working. And we work like a spiral. Remember, I was talking about it. We keep moving forward by every feedback that we are receiving, but we are still keep moving forward. And what it does is this leads to reduced time to market, because we are able to deliver at end of each sprint. Now, whenever the customer decides that the maximum value has been attained, they can release to market. So we are reducing the time to market, which leads to lower costs and ultimately the higher stakeholder satisfaction. And that is how Agile helps the organizations. So that ends my workshop that we were discussing on what actually is Scrum. I wanted to demystify the whole the idea of Scrum, and I hope I have been able to deliver some value to you. In case you want to understand more, or you want to gain more knowledge, or you want to become Scrum Master or product owner, we have upcoming class workshops for certification. We have 6th and 7th November when we are doing the Agile Scrum Product Owner class. We have 19th to 20th November when we are doing the PSM, or the Project Professional Scrum Master workshop. We have Agile Scrum Master on 27th and 28th November. And then we also have the Professional Scrum Product Owner workshop. Now this PSM and PSPO are scrum.org certifications. Agile Scrum Product Owner and the Agile Scrum Master workshops are the EXIN certifications. So in case you're interested, you can go to the website scrumadvisors.com/workshops, and you can look up the schedule and the pricing. And if you did like my workshop today, please go on my LinkedIn profile, which is Jasneet Dua-Agile, and do leave me a recommendation, which is very, very appreciated by me. Rest, I will, in case you want anything more, we can take the question and answer sessions. I am open to questions right now. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Christopher.
This is Joel while people are formulating their questions. So you have a lot of certifications. You're talking about the upcoming training here. So if someone's getting into Scrum, you know, is there an order to taking these classes? Is there better certifications than others? Is there kind of an order to the process?
It
what do you
depends
recommend?
totally on the, so Scrum Master is a different certification than Scrum Product Owner. Some people do like both Scrum Master and Scrum Product Owner. As I mentioned earlier, so Scrum Master is a one part of the Scrum team. Scrum Product Owner is a different part of the Scrum team. So two different certifications for two different jobs entirely within a Scrum team. So the certifications are different from the, so Agile Scrum Product Owner is from EXIN, Agile Scrum Master is from EXIN, PSM and PSPO are from scrum.org. Scrum.org has definitely more visibility in North America. EXIN has huge visibility in Europe and Asia, and they are very popular here also in North America. So the EXIN workshops are little cheaper as compared to PSM and PSPO workshops. If you want, you can always reach out to me and I can share you the pricing. And we do give some preference to the IIBA members. We can offer you additional discounts, but people can reach out and we can discuss the discount offline.
Okay, so Brian asked in the chat session, if you have a small team, can you be both a product owner and a dev team, or?
Yes.
Scrum Master and Product Owner, etc. He's mentioning they're a team of 4. So what would you advise there?
Yes, yes, definitely. If it's a small team, it is entirely possible that the product owner can be part of the development team. And it is something which is not unheard of, and it has been done. But all you need to be ensuring is that the product owner role or the responsibilities do not get sidelined. So it requires a definite discipline on the part of the person who's acting as a product owner and the team member. Does that answer your question, Brian?
He answers yes in the chat window.
Yeah.
Yeah, people can feel free to unmute if they'd like to ask questions. Don't need to use the chat.
Hi, Jensen Knight, and this is Lee speaking. Thanks for the presentation, and it's wonderful. I learned a lot of knowledge. And one question I have, it is you mentioned if the business unit is satisfied with with the requirement in the higher priority, and when the project reach to the delivering time. And I'm just wondering the list of features and which is in the product log will be implemented after the product launch, or it will be just kept in the product log and until there is a next project and running.
It basically depends entirely on the product owner and the customer or the stakeholders on how they want to be able to deliver a product, whether they want to do it on fixed timeline based or a fixed scope. So they could either be deciding, okay, if we are fixing scope, then the timeline may be variable, or if they are trying to say, okay, the timeline is fixed, the scope can be variable, because once the maximum value is derived, they can deliver. So again, it's open to the customers, but yes, that's a discussion that has to be had between the product owner and the stakeholders or the customer. Did I answer your? Did that answer your question correctly, Lee, or was I?
Yes.
Because I think I missed some part of your question because your voice was a little too low. I had to strain to hear that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's answered my question. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Jordan. I have a question.
Sure,
Can you
Jordan.
talk a little bit about sprint injections? Because we have a lot of high priority things that are coming into our sprints, and it's really hard to control, but they're types of things that must get done immediately or in the next week. And so our sprints are pretty chaotic because of it. I'd appreciate any advice you have.
Jordan, are you a Scrum Master or the product owner of your team, or do you have a different Scrum Master and the product owner in your team?
Yeah, I'm the product owner.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you have to push back. You would literally have to fight for your team. And actually, it should be more of the role of the Scrum Master to protect against your wish list. And your wish list is something which you would have to protect, have to fight at the executive level to ensure that, too frequent changes do not happen. One, you have to make sure that no change happens within the sprint. At the end of the sprint, you can always decide that there is a high priority item which needs to be added or removed, or low priority item which needs to be removed from your product backlog, or the priority needs to be changed of your product backlog. That's something which you would need to decide. But frequent changes is something that you need to ensure that it does not happen. So I can tell you an example of one of the companies that I am coaching, and it took a lot of time there. I literally had to shout at them number of times before they got into the habit of being able to, push back against the wishes of their CEO actually. So there we were faced frequently with this problem that the customer requirements kept coming so frequently that they had to kind of work out on how, and they were literally flooded with the requests, and they had to make so many changes mid sprints, end of sprints, that they were getting tired. So what they found was that they started to list down the activities, the time periods that they are spending on the changes, and list down the actual activities that they are doing, the time that they are able to spend on the defined or the long-term activities. So short-term activities, which are the customer requirements that were coming in very frequently, the production requests that was coming in very frequently, and the long-term goals that they had to do. What they found was that the long-term goals, this took about 3 months before they were able to get that data, that the long-term goals, they were able to spend only 20 to 25% of their time. Customer requests were taking 50% of the time, and the production issues were taking up 20% of time, and then the 5% of time was left for them to work on the technical debts or the old bugs and the issues that they needed to fix. Now, when they presented this data to the CEO and the executive team and the sales team, even they got some sort of a realization. So now what was decided was, okay, we would focus on 50% of our time on long-term activities, 25% of our time is on the new customer requests, 10 or 15% time is on the production request, and 10% of the time is to the technical debts or the old issues and the improvements that they needed to do. But yes, that's a data that you need to be able to compile and be able to come up with and be able to present, because without data, if you go and fight, nobody's going to listen to you.
Sounds like I need someone to fight against me. I need a stronger Scrum Master because I'm the one who keeps putting stuff in. I'm doing it to myself.
So the Scrum Master has to fight you, you have to fight the executives, and the pushback has to happen somewhere.
Yep. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This is Joel.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Stacy matrix, and you talked about deciding if a project or initiative should be waterfall or agile. So my experience is that organizations are either waterfall or they fully embrace agile. And sometimes projects that should be not the way the organization usually thinks, the project really should be run that opposite way. So, what do you suggest in those cases, and how are those decisions usually made in the companies you've worked with that are most effective?
Again, in the organization that I am currently coaching, they have 3 different types of projects. So one project is a customer, again, as I mentioned, long-term project request. And there are second project, which is, what they need to do is the project already exists. They need to provide a couple of features that need to be added and provided to the customer. So that kind of a project, doing a Scrum-based development is simply not required. So in that case, I don't even ask them to go about doing that. All they do is they select 2 or 3 members of a team. They give them the request, the project requirements, and the project delivery date is kept as 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months, and they are asked to go and deliver. So in that case, it's simply that they know what is required. They know the technology which needs to be done to deliver it. They just go bang, 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 one after the other. They're not looking at creating a sprint or anything, and they do that. So it's, again, something, a conscious decision that needs to be taken at the team level or at the executive levels also. So if you take it at the team level, you can always let the executives know, okay, that at the executive level that, okay, we understand the product specification, we understand the scope, and if there is no change in the scope, which is we know that these are 2 or 3 features which need to be implemented, we will be able to deliver within the next 3 months, and we just need to finalize the specification and move forward. So that approach can be left at the team level and can be, so it can work from, you can use that bottom-up approach, which actually works there. Does it answer your question, Joel?
Yes, that's fine. So I encourage everyone to jump in, ask questions.
This is Christopher. I had a quick question about a new organization that's new to this process, and I work with a nonprofit. So there's already some skepticism about business processes in general. And having talked to a number of people, what I hear is that this is a process that you have to jump in and start doing and make the mistakes and start to habituate and adapt and do all of that. Do you have any concerns about, if we commit to this for a while and then we fail, the biggest thing that would happen is we just fail to adopt this as a process? Are there any other, I guess, vulnerabilities or concerns that you would have about organizations embarking on this for the first time?
See, remember one thing. Scrum is an unending cycle. Agile is an unending cycle. Now, we as human beings, and especially I'll talk about me as an engineer, we like to work on a defined outcome. We like to work on a start of a thing and end of a thing, and we need to look at a defined interval, and once we've done with that, we move on to the next thing. But when we are talking of Agile or a Scrum, it's a continuous cycle of improvement. There is no start. Once you start, there is no end date because you keep improving. You can, of course, keep short-term goals on what you're trying to achieve, but it's a continuous cycle. And because there is no end to that cycle, it's difficult to comprehend. It is said Scrum is very easy to understand, but very hard to implement. Scrum, Agile. When I talk of Scrum, I mean Agile or Scrum. So I use both terms complementarily. So it's a different approach. It's a different mindset. If you have the mindset that you may fail, then you would probably fail. But if you have a mindset that you want to keep improving in the organization, you want a continuous cycle of improvement in your organization, I can assure you the chances of failure are far reduced. It probably would not happen, because if you go with a positive mindset, you would see the improvements coming in from day one. The cohesiveness between the team would be there. The communication improvements would be there. So those are things which you cannot measure, but you'll be able to feel those things happening.
So, Chris, this is the other Brian. If I may add to what he just said, because that was very valuable information. But one of the things that the group I was with of developers, some teams embraced Agile, some teams did not, in varying degrees of success. The ones that were most successful were the ones that followed the what Agile calls the celebrations, the backlog grooming as a team, the retrospectives as a team. And the retrospectives were really important. So that way you can, as you was just talking about, the continuous improvement aspect. The teams that did not do the retrospectives, we found, were the ones that struggled the most and never improved the way they did Agile. Because it's not only, the nice thing about Agile is you're not only improving the product you're working on, but you also improve your working relationships and working environment.
Yeah.
Great,
I
thank you.
agree there, Brian. And this is a very common thing that we say, that if you want to implement Scrum, please implement it fully, not half-heartedly, or don't do just 2 or 3 ceremonies and say, okay, you've implemented Scrum. If you want to see the benefits of Scrum, implement everything. Have sprint reviews, have your sprint retrospectives, have your daily Scrums, have your grooming exercises. Those things are all important parts and important aspects. And as you correctly said, sprint retrospective is one of the most important exercises, or one of the most important meetings in Scrum. If you miss that out, the chances of improving as a team are lost. So either you implement everything that is mentioned in the Scrum guide, or you would never be able to achieve what you set out to achieve and be able to get the maximum benefits out of the Scrum framework.
Okay, so we're at about 8:15. So Jasneet, I want to thank you very much on behalf of IIBA Seattle and the chapter and all those who attended today. You did a great job clearly presenting, the information on Scrum. So glad that you could come to our meeting tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining in. And as I tell every workshop that I attend or every workshop that I host, it's a learning exercise for me also. So the questions that you guys ask me help me also grow as a professional, as a Scrum practitioner. What I have seen about Scrum or Agile is that it's a never-ending, as I said, it's a never-ending improvement cycle. And even we as Scrum practitioners, we keep improving. And with each question that you ask, even I learn something new. So thank you so much for attending this session. And I hope I was able to impart some value to the whole, for the whole Agile process that we've been discussing on.
Yeah. Thank you, Jasneet. It was wonderful.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
So people are, Jasneet, you can take off if you want. You're free to join. You might want to stop the recording at this point. But if anyone wants to chat or just, ask questions about the chapter, talk with other BAs, feel free to unmute and